Hi everyone, compliments to the new year 2025. Welcome back to Biblical True Crime. I am your host Yanda, and today we are going to talk about the tragic end of Absalom. Just a quick reminder, Absalom is David's third son by Maacah, who is the daughter of the king of Geshur. That made Absalom royal both on his mother's end and his father's end, which made sense for him to be the next in line for the throne. Absalom was described as a very handsome young man. He was beautiful. He had long, luscious hair. It was so long that he had to cut it every year because it got heavy for him. He was also a very popular prince among the people. He was quite literally David's favorite child, apparently. So we know from the previous episode that Absalom is now a fugitive of the law in Jerusalem because he had murdered his half-brother Amnon because of what he did to his sister Tamar, and now he is currently in hiding back in his mother's land in Geshur with his grandpa. He's there for around 3 years. Okay, now back in Jerusalem, David lost Amnon and Absalom all at the same time, and not only that, but he is left in shambles, right? Comforted only by the fact that not all of his sons were murdered by Absalom, but only one. I mean, it was a comfort up to a certain point. He was still down, and he was not the same anymore. Now, Joab noticed this, and he came up with a very interesting plan. He went up to Tekoa to bring back a wise woman who had to pretend to be in mourning. Joab gave her the words to say to the king. So the woman goes to the king and engages in conversation with him, right? Coming up with the story that she's a mourning widow, her husband died, and now her two sons were fighting. No one was around to separate them. Then one son killed the other. And then she goes about how the family is dealing with this and wanting to execute the son who killed his brother because that's just the punishment. According to her, that was like leaving her husband with no name or remnant on the earth. Then he was like, you know what? No worries. She can go back home, and whoever tries to bother her, they can be sent straight to him, the king. This woman was backed up by the king himself, pretty much. So the woman asked for permission to speak to David again, right? Inquiring about how can she trust that the king has her back when he himself hasn't returned his son whom he had banished, Absalom, right, from Jerusalem. And then she continued and said, "For we will surely die and become like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away a life, but he devises means so that his banished ones are not expelled from him. Now therefore I have come to speak of this thing to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid. And your maidservant said, I will now speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy me and my sin together from the inheritance of God." Your maidservant said, "The word of my lord the king will now be comforting. For as the angel of God, so is my lord the king in discerning good and evil. And may the Lord your God be with you." Now the king was like, hold on a minute. Is Joab involved in any of this, perhaps? The woman was like, yep, he set me up to do this and gave me all these words that I'm speaking to you. Now Joab was summoned, and the king told him that he has given Absalom an execution free card and that he may return to Jerusalem. Absalom, however, was not allowed to see the king's face. When I tell you that Absalom was praised by all people, left, right, center, his good looks were good looking. Now Absalom is back in Jerusalem, he's back in his house and everything like that, right? And he gets married and he has 3 sons and a daughter, which he names after his sister Tamar. 2 years has passed and Absalom has never seen his father. He's never seen the king. And he's been trying to reach out. Obviously, he was talking to Joab. Joab is just not picking up. Okay, there was no phone back in the day, but it's kind of like he's not picking up the phone. He's not responding to the text. Nothing. Absalom was like, okay, in order for me to get this guy's attention, I need to do something drastic. You know, one thing about Absalom, he knows how to get attention. So he sent his servants to go burn Joab's fields. He did that and it worked. It worked because Joab went to Absalom straight face to face. Is like, what's going on? Why did you do that? And obviously that gave Absalom the opportunity to be like, yo, I need you to go to the king because I gotta see him. Joab went to the king and presented Absalom's request to David. And then Absalom was called in. He presented himself to the king as well, bowing his face on the ground. And David stood and kissed Absalom, forgiving him and seeing no iniquity in his son. Even David couldn't resist Absalom's beauty. He couldn't. You'd think, happy ever after. But we're here. This is biblical true crime, so there's no happy ever after, because what happened next? So Absalom, he was not done causing trouble in Jerusalem. Absalom gave himself chariots and horses and about 50 men to run before him, right? He would do this thing where he gets up early in the morning and approaches anyone who has a lawsuit to present it to the king, to let him know that there is no deputy of the king to hear them. Then he slyly suggests that if only he was made judge in the land, then everyone who had a lawsuit can be given justice by him. In this way, more people were swayed to his side. This was a very patient game because it took 40 years. So after those 40 years, Absalom went to the king to request a trip back to Hebron and pay a vow he had made to the Lord that when he returned to Jerusalem, he will serve the Lord. And the king sent him in peace, oblivious to what's happening or what has been happening for the last 40 years. Forgot to breathe. Now, before Absalom left, he sent spies all over the tribes of Israel, saying to them, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. It was clear as day that the people with Absalom continually increased in number. Now, a messenger had come to David and told him how the majority of the people were now behind Absalom. With that, David and his servants and everyone loyal to him packed their bags and ran for the hills. They left Jerusalem immediately. After that, Absalom was able to come back to Jerusalem, take over the throne with no opposition, right? Under the advisement of Ahithophel. In that same breath, Absalom called a council to discuss what actions should be taken against David, his own father. Ahithophel advised that Absalom move against the retreating David as soon as possible, while Hushai, who's secretly loyal to David and a spy, went against him, saying the pursuit will fail. His counteroffer was for Absalom to gather his men for one full attack against David, giving David enough time to summon an army of his own. So Absalom was anointed as king, positioned Amasa as the captain of his army, and ran across the Jordan to meet his father's forces. When I tell you he was utterly defeated, that he lost over 20,000 men in battle, forcing him to retreat through the forest by a mule. However, that was poor judgment on his end because he had his hair caught in the thick boughs of the tree. If only it was the end of the year. Joab found him and ended his life, even though David had given explicit instructions that his son may not be killed in battle. Yeah, he loved his son, bro.
Nah.
He loved his son. What can I say?
No, you raise your fist, I raise mine. Let's go.
He died. Joab did the thing. When David was notified of Absalom's passing, he was heard crying out loud, saying, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." The end. The wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Absalom's anger drove him to seek revenge on his half-brother Amnon, to running away from the consequences of his actions, to coming back on and being forgiven by his father and the charges dropped, to plotting against his own father, taking the throne, to his defeat, and finally his downfall, resulting in his death. As we can see the unfolding events that Absalom's wrath produced, it is clear that there is no room for God's righteousness. It is vital to turn to God at all times, especially when words or actions you're going to regret for the rest of your life are at a moment's difference. We see that Absalom ran away from his consequences because he didn't do the right thing. There's a video in Instagram that I saw, and this gentleman was sharing a story about how he got into a fight defending his sister, right? His father taught him a valuable lesson, that there are consequences for your actions. Just because you do the right thing doesn't mean you don't pay a price. It's not a right thing if you get away with it. And he's right. Jesus paid the price. The disciples paid the price. John the Baptist paid the price. Paul paid the price. You too will and must pay your price. God isn't saying don't feel what you feel. Ephesians 4:26 says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry." Here's Bible for that. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 9. "Do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools." Psalms 37:8. "Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It leads only to evil." Colossians 3:8. "But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips." Romans 12:21. "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Next up, we see Absalom presenting himself as a self-righteous sinner. I learned about this term again in Instagram, and it shook me. Absalom's actions in presenting himself as righteous by avenging his sister only to run away from the law, presenting himself as a better leader to the people of his father's kingdom after being forgiven, all the while he hasn't addressed his own sin, has gone free without bearing the consequences of his actions. Let's take a look at the Bible, shall we? Proverbs chapter 14:12. "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." Romans 3:23. "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." 1 John 1:8. "If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us." Proverbs 27:2. "Let someone else praise you and not your own mouth, an outsider and not your own lips." James 4:10. "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." Proverbs 16:5. "The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished." Absalom had the same problem Amnon had: evil counsel. This evil counsel set them up for their destruction, for their death. Make sure to test your counsel that you get from people around you. Submit it to God, and He will filter out evil counsel, show it to you, and then the decision is all up to you whether you want to surround yourself with a different kind of counsel or not. That decision is all up to you. Because if you don't, the road to destruction and to death will be set out for you. And the saddest thing is, you'll be the driver on the driver's seat, speeding over the cliff to your death. Bible, Proverbs chapter 12:5. The plans of the righteous are just, but the advice of the wicked is deceitful. Proverbs 15:22. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. That is all from me. Thank you for joining me on this episode. May God continue to bless you abundantly with love, joy, peace, and everything else that you need. In Jesus' name, amen. Bye.